They told me family was sacred. Blood was unbreakable. That's what I was raised to believe. Until the night my daughter asked a question that made the air go still. What money? 2 words. That's all it took to expose 9 months of betrayal. My parents didn't move at first. My father's coffee cup hovered mid-air, steam curling like the last breath of a dying truth. My mother blinked twice, that old habit she had whenever a lie was forming. And I realized something in that silence. I had been funding their illusion. Every month I'd wired $2,000 home, money for my child, her future, her safety. I was overseas, working, bleeding hours into someone else's war so my family could rest easy. But the money never reached her. I thought I was saving them. They were consuming me. The first time I noticed, it was small. My daughter's shoes too tight, her coat worn thin. I blamed shipping delays, inflation, the 1,000 little excuses that keep us from looking straight into betrayal. But the truth doesn't hide forever. It waits, it watches, and when it's ready, it knocks. That knock came in a kitchen filled with the smell of burnt toast and fear. I looked at my parents, 2 pillars of my childhood, and saw not love but hunger. The kind that hides behind polite smiles. The kind that counts your sacrifices like currency. And that's when I understood. The oldest dark history isn't written in books or carved into stone. It's whispered across dinner tables. It's born in families that mistake control for care. I trusted them with my child's future. That was my first mistake. My second was believing I'd be forgiven for discovering the truth. The next morning I replayed every call, every message, every thank you my mother had whispered through the phone. The pattern was clear now, a script built to keep me blind. "She's growing fast," she'd say, laughing softly. "Don't worry, we've got her covered." And I had believed her because that's what sons are trained to do. Believe the woman who once wiped the blood from their knees. But belief is a currency, and mine had been spent. I went through my transfer receipts, each payment precise, dated, real. 2,000, 2,000, 2,000, 9 deposits, 9 months, and not a single trace of where the money had gone. My father had handled the logistics, he said. He always liked that word. Clean, bureaucratic, distant. The word you use when you want to make theft sound like management. I remembered the first time he told me money changes people. He was counting bills at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd later lie to my face. He'd smiled and said, "You never really know someone until there's cash on the counter." I was too young then to hear the confession inside the warning. When I asked for records, he changed the subject. When I pressed harder, he raised his voice, reminding me of every debt I'd ever owed him. Every ride, every meal, every roof. That's how guilt works. It rewrites the past until gratitude becomes a leash. My daughter sat silent through it all. She'd never seen me angry before, and I wasn't, not yet. I was studying, calculating, watching them both stumble through excuses that didn't fit their mouths. My mother clutched her necklace, my father his mug. Symbols of habit, control, composure, but cracks had formed. You can hear them if you listen closely. The sound of people realizing they've lost control of the story. That night I wrote everything down, dates, names, lies, tone shifts. Not for revenge, yet, but for clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. I didn't sleep, I just sat in the dark and watched the walls. Every family has its own mythology. Ours was built on duty and love. By morning, I understood that mythology for what it truly was, a cover story for greed. Morning arrived like an interrogation light. I brewed coffee I didn't drink and waited for my father to come downstairs. He always kept his phone in his shirt pocket, habit from years of pretending he had business worth calling him. That phone held the map to my missing money. I asked him again, quiet, careful. "Where did the transfers go?" He sighed the way guilty men do, heavy and theatrical. "You think I'd steal from my own granddaughter?" He didn't notice that he hadn't said no. My mother came in then, robe drawn tight, eyes swollen from a night of whispers. She tried to soften the air. "We just borrowed, sweetheart. You know how things have been." Borrowed. A word that sounds polite when spoken by family. A word that means you'll never see it again. I asked how much they'd borrowed. My mother glanced at my father. My father stared at his coffee. Silence. Again. The most fluent language of guilt. I took his phone when he left the room. Password was the year of my birth. Irony has a dark sense of humor. The statements told the story better than either of them ever could. Transfers rerouted through joint accounts. Cash withdrawals days later. Grocery stores, gas stations, then bigger things. New furniture, a weekend trip, restaurant bills that could have fed my daughter for months. The receipts were small betrayals stitched into a pattern too perfect to be accidental. They hadn't fallen on hard times. They'd simply decided the money looked better in their hands. I closed the phone and sat still. The part of me that wanted to scream was loud, but louder still was the part that wanted to understand. Because when someone steals from you, they're not just taking money, they're showing you who they really are. That night I deleted my parents' numbers from my phone. Not as an act of rage, but as a ritual of separation. Family can't be trusted simply because they share your name. Sometimes the oldest blood carries the darkest lessons. I stared at the ceiling and whispered the truth to myself. They didn't steal my money. They stole my daughter's trust, and for that, there will be balance. Balance doesn't come from rage, it comes from precision. I didn't shout. I didn't confront them again. I simply stopped explaining myself. When you pull silence tight enough, it becomes a mirror, and people start confessing to their own reflections. Over the next week, I acted normal. I called to ask about the weather, about the neighbors, about anything that would keep them from sensing the shift. My mother's voice was sugar, my father's calm rehearsed, but cracks spread fast once the truth has been named, even if no one says it out loud. I asked my daughter to forward every text my parents had sent her. "Sweetheart," I said, "just so I can keep track while I'm overseas." What she sent broke something clean inside me. Messages full of guilt bait and half promises. "Grandpa's been helping with bills. Tell Daddy thank you when he calls." They'd turned affection into accounting. I printed every transfer record, every screenshot, every date. I built a timeline the way soldiers map enemy movements. Each deposit became an entry in a private ledger of betrayal. Not for the courts, justice doesn't live there anymore. But for clarity, for proof, for the moment when they'd finally see what they'd done reflected back without filters. On the 10th night, I called them both to dinner. My tone was warm, almost kind. I cooked the same meal my mother used to make on my birthdays: steak, mashed potatoes, a glass of red. Nostalgia is a powerful sedative. We sat, ate, smiled, and then I laid the folder on the table. My father froze mid-chew. My mother's fork slipped and clattered against the plate. I didn't accuse. I simply opened the first page and began reading the dates out loud, the kitchen filled with the sound of paper turning. Thin, surgical, final. When I finished, no one spoke. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents small, not as figures of authority, but as people who'd gambled their integrity and lost. I stood, collected the folder, and said quietly, "This isn't revenge, this is remembrance." Then I walked out into the cold, knowing the silence I left behind would do the rest. The next morning, my phone was full of apologies. Messages that sounded like they'd been practiced in the dark. "We didn't mean to hurt you. It was just for a little while. You've changed, son." I didn't reply. Silence was the only language they could still hear. For the first time in years, my day was quiet. No calls asking for help. No guilt disguised as conversation. My daughter laughed in the kitchen, a sound too light for a house that had carried so much weight. I let her talk, just talk, about school, friends, plans. The sound of her voice rebuilt something in me that money never could. Later, I found the folder on my desk. I could have burned it, deleted the proof, tried to forget. But forgetting is how we get lost. So I kept it sealed, tucked away, a record not of what they'd taken but of what I'd finally seen. People like to say time heals. It doesn't, it reveals. Weeks passed, and the apologies turned into silence, then into small gestures, cards, gifts, a check for your trouble. I didn't cash it. Some debts aren't meant to be balanced with paper. One night my daughter asked, "Are we still family?" I told her the truth. Family isn't what you're born into, it's what you protect. She nodded, eyes steady, older than her years. That's when I realized what had really been stolen. Not money, not trust, but the simplicity of believing that love alone is safe. The quiet stretched on for months. My parents lived only a few miles away, but it might as well have been another country. When we passed each other in town, there were no words. Just that flicker of recognition between people who know the same secret but can never speak it aloud. I'd thought revenge would feel like victory, but it didn't. It felt like waking from a long fever, sweat, shaking, and the strange calm that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. Betrayal doesn't end with confrontation. It ends when you stop needing them to understand what they've done. That's the quietest kind of freedom. It took time before the noise inside me started to fade. When it did, what remained wasn't anger, it was recognition. The realization that what my parents had done wasn't new. It was a continuation of something older, a habit that had moved quietly through our family for generations. My father had learned control from his own father, a man who measured love in obedience. My mother had learned silence from hers, A woman who never raised her voice but could freeze a room with a look. They hadn't invented manipulation, they'd inherited it. And I had almost passed it on. I began seeing the pattern in smaller things. The way I'd used guilt to make my daughter study harder. The way I'd apologized to keep the peace even when I wasn't wrong. Every family has its own operating system, written long before we arrive. If you don't rewrite it, it writes you. I started walking at night, miles through empty streets, letting the cold strip away the lies I'd carried. Each step became a question. What have I been taught to call love? What do I owe and to whom? Who benefits from my silence? Some nights I almost miss the old routine, the comfort of being needed, the illusion of loyalty. But comfort and captivity wear the same face until you learn to look closely. One evening, my daughter handed me a sketch she'd drawn of the two of us standing under a tree. "We're starting over," she said simply. That picture became my new ledger, proof that the cycle could stop. I mailed my parents a letter, short and clear. "I forgive you, but we're done pretending this is normal. No signature, no return address. Some truths don't need discussion. They just need distance." The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was space. Space to build something cleaner, quieter, stronger, and for the first time, I understood that the darkest histories aren't the ones we uncover. They're the ones we finally refuse to repeat. Change didn't happen in one moment. It came in fragments, the way light creeps into a room that's been sealed too long. My daughter and I built new rituals. Dinner with no phones. Questions that actually waited for answers. When I told her stories about my childhood, I didn't hide the cracks anymore. She needed to know that love isn't perfect. That sometimes it limps. The first time she called me Dad again without hesitation, it hit harder than any apology I could have received. That single word meant the distance between us had started to close. I started therapy, though I never told my parents. In our family, therapy was treated like confession, as if truth were something shameful. But I sat there anyway, talking through decades of quiet expectations and polite control. Each session felt like digging up an old floorboard and finding something buried underneath. I realized how much energy I'd spent performing stability, pretending everything was fine. That's what betrayal does. It makes you think you have to earn calm by pretending you're not broken. My daughter asked one night if I missed them. I told her the truth. I miss what I wanted them to be. She nodded, and I could see in her eyes that she understood. Healing isn't forgetting. It's refusing to carry what doesn't belong to you. I stopped chasing closure. I stopped rehearsing arguments in my head. Instead, I started building smaller, truer things, teaching her how to manage money, how to recognize manipulation when it wears a smile, how to say no without guilt. We laughed more, even at the small things. The way the dog stole food off the counter, the burnt pancakes we still ate anyway. Real life returned, not perfect, but ours. Sometimes late at night, I still hear echoes of the old voices, my father's tone, my mother's sigh, but they no longer command the room. They're just ghosts, and ghosts only have power if you keep feeding them. This was our new inheritance, truth, taught gently, because the best revenge isn't punishment, it's evolution. The call came on a gray Sunday, one of those quiet mornings when peace feels fragile. My mother's voice trembled just enough to sound human again. "We'd like to see her," she said, "just for a few minutes." I could hear my father breathing in the background, steady, careful. Years of distance had turned our conversations into negotiations. I told her I'd think about it. I hung up before she could say thank you. The rest of the day, the question followed me like a shadow. Could forgiveness exist without reopening the wound? I asked my daughter what she wanted. She hesitated, then said, "If they're sorry, I'll listen, but I don't want to feel small again." That sentence settled something in me. I'd spent a lifetime mistaking politeness for peace. She refused to. Maybe that was the proof that the cycle really could break. When they arrived, I didn't invite them inside. We stood on the porch, their faces older, their eyes searching for the version of me that used to flinch. I wasn't him anymore. My father started first. "We went too far," he said. "We thought we were helping." My mother nodded, tears balanced carefully at the edge of control. I let them speak, not to punish them, but to see if truth could survive outside their excuses. My daughter stepped forward and said, "You took something that wasn't yours. We're still okay, but we remember." Her voice didn't shake. That was the moment I realized strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it just stands still and tells the truth. My parents left quietly. No hugs, no promises, just a silence that felt cleaner than words. That night, I told my daughter, "You handled that better than I ever could." She smiled. You taught me how. And in that small exchange, I saw what all the pain had built. Not vengeance, not victory, just a new lineage, one built on awareness instead of obedience, on choice instead of guilt. After they left, the house was silent again, but this time it felt earned. I made tea, sat by the window and watched, the light shift across the floor. For years I'd mistaken control for protection, thinking, if I managed every detail, nothing could fall apart. But control is just fear wearing armor. It guards you from chaos, but it also keeps you from connection. I thought about my parents and how they'd lived their whole lives like that, measuring love and obedience, confusing silence with safety. It wasn't evil, it was inherited blindness, the kind that grows when no one teaches you how to trust. I began to wonder how many generations it would take to unlearn the lesson. That power means possession, that love means ownership, that loyalty means silence. My daughter broke that spell just by being honest. She didn't carry their weight, and she refused to carry mine. That was her revolution, quiet, simple, complete. I started rebuilding my idea of power not as something to hold, but something to share. Power wasn't control over others, it was mastery of yourself. The ability to choose clarity over comforts. Some nights I wrote letters to my younger self, the boy who wanted to make everyone proud. I told him what no one told me. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't need permission to protect what's yours. It's strange how peace arrives. Not as a grand revelation, but as the absence of noise. I no longer checked my phone expecting apologies. I no longer rehearsed the story in my head, waiting for a better ending. The ending had already happened. It just didn't look like I expected. I realized I didn't need closure from my parents. I'd already rewritten the story by living differently. Power, I learned, isn't about winning. It's about walking away without needing to be right. It's about leaving the door unlocked, not because you want them back, but because you're no longer afraid of who walks through. I used to define myself by what I provided, the money I earned, the hours I worked, the promises I kept. When that structure collapsed, I didn't know who I was without it. But the longer I sat inside the quiet, the more I realized that identity isn't built on what you give away, it's built on what you keep true. Every betrayal peels away a layer of illusion until only what's solid remains. I stopped introducing myself by my job title or my sacrifices. I started saying simpler things. I'm a father, I'm learning. Because that's all identity really is, a story you choose to keep telling. At night I walked past the mirror and barely recognized the face staring back. Not older exactly, just stripped down. The kind of face you earn after surviving a lie and refusing to become one. Betrayal has a strange gift hidden inside it, clarity. Once you've seen people twist the truth for comfort, you start to notice how often you've done the same to yourself. I began confronting the smaller deceptions, the way I'd say I'm fine when I wasn't, the way I'd smile through exhaustion, the way I'd call loyalty what was really fear of being alone. Each admission felt dangerous at first, then liberating. My daughter noticed the difference before I did. You don't talk like you used to, she said. How's that? I asked, like you're waiting for someone to approve it. Her words landed with the quiet weight of truth. That was the transformation, learning to speak without seeking permission. One evening we sat outside watching the sun fall behind the houses, and I told her something I'd never said aloud. Everything I thought made me strong was just armor. Real strength is walking away from the armor and still standing. She nodded, eyes steady on the horizon. And for the first time I felt the story shift, not as a wound but as a beginning. The man who once trusted blindly was gone. What remained was quieter, sharper, and finally his own. If you've listened this far, you probably know that betrayal doesn't just live in families. It hides in every place where love meets dependence. Work, friendship, loyalty, trust. It grows in silence and feeds on politeness. Maybe you felt it too, the moment you realized someone you trusted was using your belief in them as currency. Maybe you kept forgiving, thinking patience was virtue. That's what I did. But there's a line between kindness and surrender. Once you cross it, you stop being generous, you start disappearing. Here's what I learned the hard way. People who truly love you don't need to control you. They don't measure your worth by your usefulness. They don't rewrite the story to make themselves the victim. The older I get, the more I understand that strength isn't built in moments of fury, it's built in moments of restraint. The night I placed those records on the table, I didn't win anything. I just stopped losing myself. So, if you're listening, ask yourself, who are you trying to save that keeps drowning you? How many times have you called it loyalty when it was really fear? The truth is simple, but it hurts. Not everyone deserves access to your effort. Family doesn't make someone safe. History doesn't make someone right. I learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're doors that you get to choose when to open. And every time you choose yourself, the door to your future opens a little wider. If this story stirs something in you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from someone else's lie, type this phrase in the comments twice. I remember who I am, not for me, for you, because words shape identity, and speaking truth aloud anchors it in the world. Don't whisper it. Don't hide it behind irony or humor. Say it with intent. I remember who I am. Once you say it, you'll feel something shift. Not because the past changes, but because you stop needing it to. When you say it, I remember who I am, the world doesn't suddenly forgive you. It just gets clearer. You start noticing how often people speak from fear, how many promises are built to keep you small, and you stop trying to fit inside them. Remembering yourself isn't a single act, it's a practice. It's waking each morning and choosing truth over comfort. It's letting the mask fall even when it feels safer to keep smiling. For me, it began in small things. I stopped apologizing for saying no. I stopped explaining why I needed space. I stopped pretending that forgiveness meant access. My daughter saw the change before anyone else. You breathe different now, she said. She was right, because breathing had stopped feeling like permission. It had become proof. Freedom doesn't roar, it arrives quietly. It's the absence of panic when the phone rings. It's reading a message and realizing you don't owe a response. It's walking through your own house without bracing for impact. The strangest part is how ordinary it feels. After years of chaos, calm seems suspicious. But calm is not emptiness, it's space reclaimed. I used to think revenge would give me peace. It doesn't. Peace comes when you stop auditioning for other people's approval. Sometimes I still hear echoes, the old guilt, the old fear, but they fade faster now. Each time I choose silence over explanation, truth over performance, the echoes grow fainter. Remembering who you are means understanding that you were never meant to live as someone's resource. You were meant to live as someone's example. When I look at my daughter, I see that lesson reflected back. The cycle ends not in fury, but in awareness. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not escape, not revenge, but the quiet certainty that no one gets to define you again. The night after everything unraveled, I sat alone in the same kitchen where it all began. The clock ticked loud, like it was reminding me that time keeps moving whether you heal or not. The house smelled of cold coffee and paper. Those receipts, those records, the proof that truth had always been within reach. I didn't feel triumph, just release. People imagine endings as explosions or apologies. But most endings are quiet, just a breath, a long exhale after years of holding it in. My parents never called, they didn't have to. Their silence said everything. And maybe that's fine, because closure isn't something they can give me, it's something I build every time I choose not to hate them. Hatred keeps you bound to the same fire that burned you. It gives the past power it doesn't deserve. So I set it down. Now when I think about the money, the lies, the long months I spent trusting the wrong hands, I don't feel the sting anymore. I feel gratitude for the clarity that pain forced me to earn. Sometimes you have to lose what you love to understand the weight of your own worth. And when you finally see it, when you truly remember who you are, you stop asking others to hold it for you. I tell my daughter this now. Never let someone else define your generosity. Give, but never disappear. She nods, and I see in her eyes the kind of strength I never had at her age. That's the real inheritance, the courage to stay whole. As you listen to this, maybe something in you stirs. Maybe a face comes to mind, a name you still carry like a bruise. If so, let it go. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. You've walked with me through the dark. You've seen what silence can do, what awareness can heal. Now take that awareness and use it. Protect it. Live it. Because the greatest revenge is never destruction, it's transformation. And the quiet strength that follows when you finally remember who you are.